17th Author Fair at the El Segundo Public Library. So this panel is Novel Inventions and Intriguing Stories, and the moderator is Kevin Smith. So most of you know him, some of you don't. Kevin is an El Segundo resident. He's also a talented screenwriter. Some of his projects include Pride, Spotlight, and any other Friday. And when Kevin isn't busy writing for movies, he's an awesome baseball dad, and he coaches his son Connor. So,
well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2017 El Segundo Public Library Authors Fair Fiction Panel, Novel Inventions and Intriguing Stories. As Julie mentioned, I'm Kevin Smith, and we do have a panel of extraordinary writers for you today. They've written remarkable books that, simply put, are an absolute must-read. We're going to start with a quick introduction of each of our panelists, if you don't mind, so you can indulge me with this. We're going to begin with Jian Sidar. Now, an author who lives in Los Angeles with her husband, son, and insane dog. Jian Sidar wowed everyone with her debut novel, You Were Here. Ms. Sidar studied creative writing at Loyola Marymount University, right down the street here, and is the co-author of the book Psychic Junkie. Now, if you ever wanted to know how talented this wonderful writer is, here are a few of the reviews of her solo debut novel, You Were Here. One said, "This was another story where I just needed more. I'm so sad that it's over." Another review was, "As I said in my blurb, this is a beautiful puzzle box of a book, a page-turner that manages to also be strikingly poetic. I was gripped from the very first page and moved by the time I made it to the last." And this last review was, "Love." That's love with 8 O's, if anybody's counting. "I finished this book in one sitting. It was absolutely one of the most compelling books I've read this year. My review will be vague because there is no way to give real details without giving away the plot and spoiling the ending." So we won't give away the ending, but during the next hour we will discuss this fabulous book, You Were Here. Our next author, Meg Howard. Now, Meg is a former dancer who performed with the Joffrey, Eggleston Ballet, and City of Ballet of Los Angeles, and who toured nationally with the Broadway production of Contact, for which she won the Ovation Award in 2001 for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. Ms. Howard, the author of The Wanderers, is also the author of 2 previous novels, Blind Sight and The Crane's Dance, and the co-author of the best-selling novel City of Dark Magic and City of Lost Dreams. They were published under the pen name Magnus Flight, if I'm correct. Now, by the way, that's a pseudonym, by the way, that she uses with her writing partners, Christina Lynch, at times. Ms. Howard's nonfiction has appeared in Vogue and the Los Angeles Review of Books, and she also currently lives in Los Angeles. Our next author, Parnaz Fortan. The author of The Girl from the Garden, Ms. Fortan was born in Iran and spent her early childhood there. She received PEN USA's Emerging Voices Fellowship for this novel, which was inspired by her own family history. She has been named to the Hedgebrook Fellowship in Residency and received funding from the Elizabeth George Foundation, among other institutions. Ms. Fortan currently lives in Los Angeles with her husband and 2 of her daughters. Our next author, J. Randall Stradle.
Oh, Jay Ryan.
Jay Ryan, why did I say that? Thank you, Jay Ryan. Okay, typo. Kill the person who did it. Okay, thank you. A self-admitted foodie, Jay Ryan is the author of Kitchens of the Midwest.
Oh, the Great Midwest.
Great Midwest. Okay.
I think I wrote this.
You know what? Let that be a lesson. Do not drink and write. Okay. Jay Ryan grew up in Hastings, Minnesota. He's a Northwestern University grad, and he claims he does not own a gun, a motorcycle, which makes him unique among the men in his extended family. His first novel, Kitchens of the Great Midwest, reached the New York Times hardcover bestseller list at number 19 on its 3rd week of release. In April 2016, the American Booksellers Association named Kitchens the Indies' Choice Book of the Year Award adult debut winner. In July of 2016, the Midwest Independent Booksellers Association awarded it the 2016 Midwest Booksellers Choice Award for the year's top fiction book. And in October this past year, the Southern California Independent Booksellers Association also named Kitchens the year's top fiction book. So far, Kitchens has been acquired for publication overseas in 12 countries. In September 2015, Warner Brothers optioned the film and TV rights. By the way, Jay Ryan also was the senior story producer of Deadliest Catch, Ice Road Truckers, and a supervising producer on IRT, Deadliest Roads, Storage Wars, and Storage Wars Texas. That's versatility for you right there. Our next author, it's a long way from Houston, Texas to the frozen tundra of the University of Alaska Fairbanks. That's the route Miss Gwendolyn Womack, the author of The Fortune Teller, as well as the author of The Memory Painter, took before receiving an MFA from CalArts in directing for theater and film and becoming a semifinalist in the Academy's Nicholl Fellowship. Miss Womack's passion is writing romantic thrillers that explore a spectrum of metaphysical subjects including divination, reincarnation, magic, and ancient explorers. Her debut novel, The Memory Painter, was an RWA Prism Award winner and two-time Indie Next Pick. Her second novel is The Fortune Teller. Miss Womack currently resides in California and can be found at her keyboard or indulging in her hobby, which is painting. Our next author, Mamta Jane Valderrama.
Mamta Jane Valderrama.
Thank you. We're going to get that person. Okay. Ms. Valderrama is a writer, speaker, and entrepreneur. The author of A Girl in Traffic, she graduated from George Washington University with a bachelor's degree in journalism. After working as a reporter, she went on to receive her MBA from the University of Southern California, where she wrote an award-winning business plan centered on medical tourism. Formerly a healthcare strategist, she learned about the difficulties involved in kidney transplants and the daily suffering of those living on dialysis. These important social justice issues inspired her to write A Girl in Traffic. As a first-generation Indian American, Ms. Valderrama has visited many of the beautiful and intriguing places she describes in her novel, both in the United States and in India. She now resides in Los Angeles with their husband and daughter. Ladies and gentlemen, our exceptional panelists today. Well, I am going to start out with questions for each of them. I'll probably bounce around as we go on, if you don't mind. And feel free to elaborate, have fun. If you don't know the answer, you can turn to your fellow panelists and they can make something up since you're all fiction writers. Okay. Let's begin with, I'm going to ask Ms. Fortan about her novel, The Girl from the Garden. Now, this novel is about a suspenseful debut novel of desire, obsession, power, and vulnerability, in which a crisis of inheritance leads to the downfall of a wealthy family of Persian Jews in early 20th century Iran. Witnessed through the memories of the family's sole surviving daughter, Mahbube? There you go. Now an elderly woman living in Los Angeles. The Girl from the Garden unfolds the complex, tragic history of the Malakuti family in a long-lost Iran of generations past. Haunting, suspenseful, and inspired by events in the author's own family, it is an evocative and poignant exploration of sacrifice, betrayal, and the indelible legacy of the families that forge us. Well, Parnaz, this is your debut novel.
Yes.
Tell us how long you were carrying around the idea of this story, and what made you finally put it to pen, and tell us if it was a cathartic experience at all that it took you through while you were writing it.
I'm an immigrant. I came to America when I was 7 years old, and there was a huge diaspora of us. Most of the family settled in Beverly Hills, and the rest of us sort of went toward the valley. And on Sundays, the families would all come together at somebody's house, a relative's house. And there would be food and music, and it was a moment to sort of recapture the old country in this big, expansive, sprawling new place called Los Angeles. We would come together, and the young, the teenagers, they would go off to talk about whatever, teenagers talk about. The elders would come together and they would talk about the stories from the old country. And I was drawn to the elders. I couldn't help it because they would sit around the table, they would have their tea, and they would start talking about the past. And then it was this moment of communal storytelling where they would all come together and recreate their experience. And oftentimes they kept coming back to this one story of the matriarch of the home that they all grew up in. That woman's name was Rachel, and she was this demon of a woman. She had complete control over the entire family compound. The children were terrified of her. And I listened to the stories of Rachel growing up, and I kept wondering what leads history to create such a caricature of a human being out of a real entity. What happened to Rachel that made her this demigod to the elders of my family? And I asked them, I said, well, what was she like as a young woman? And the only two things they knew about her was that she was barren in a time and place where a woman's ability to produce a son meant everything. And she was the daughter of a bread maker, which means she married up into a very wealthy family. That's the only things they knew about her youth. So out of that, I decided, well, I'm going to tell the story of Rachel before she becomes the matriarch of this family. What happened to her? What journey did she take to become this woman? I had no choice but to tell this story because it's the story that I listened to the elders tell and retell and retell. So when I decided, I'm a writer, it's time for me to tell a story. In order to earn my wings as a writer, I had to start with this story that was given to me. So yes, it was cathartic. It was actually a call of duty to do it. And now that I've done it, I'm sort of free and I can do whatever else I want.
Can't wait to see what that is. And by the way, this book is exceptional. And we'll get back to it some more later, but it is a terrific book and a great read. So well done, very well done. My next question is going to be directed to Ms. Gian Sidar. And she wrote the book, You Were Here. And in this book, death accidentally and early has always been Abby Walters' preoccupation. Well, now 33 and eager to settle down with her commitment-shy boyfriend, a recurring dream from her past returns. It's a paralyzing nightmare of being buried alive. But this time, the dream reveals a name from her family's past. Looking for answers, Abby returns home to small-town Minnesota for the first time in 14 years. When Abby tries on her grandmother's mesmerizing diamond ring, a ring she always dreamed would be hers, she discovers a cryptic note long hidden beneath the box's velvet lining. As she begins to uncover the traces of a love triangle gone shockingly wrong nearly 70 years before, we too see that the layers of our lives may echo a past we've never known. Okay, that's pretty good stuff right there. Okay. Well, my question would be, your previous book was called Psychic Junkie, and that was based on a real-life person. So, Gian, did the idea for You Were Here come to you in a dream?
Yeah, actually it did. It probably started, I would say 2 dreams. So the first one, first of all, let me just say, I've always kind of had a little bit of a strange life where, I've dreamt things that have happened and things like that. So when I was 12 years old, I had this dream, and it was one of those dreams where I was me, but I wasn't me, and you guys might have had similar dreams where you identify as yourself, but you're not yourself, you look different, you're in a different town, yet you know the layout of the town, you know where the streets are. It was one of those dreams, and it was me and my brother, but he again looked different, and we were running through a forest, and I knew it was during a war, and the leaves were off the trees. There was a bone white sky. It was very bleak, very terrifying, and we were running from something, and we stopped at barbed wire. We couldn't go any further, and I looked to my left, and there was a soldier standing there, and it was wintertime. He was head to toe, just like covered. Where his face would have been was just black. I couldn't see. When I woke up, he was in my room. And I kept blinking my eyes and he wouldn't go away, and I blinked my eyes and he wouldn't go away, and then finally he went away. And I say I've had a weird life just because that kind of didn't freak me out that much. And so I just passed it off as, part of the dream. I was obviously still asleep, something, whatever. But a year later, my mom took us to a psychic. My mom's in the audience laughing right now. My mom took us to a psychic for my 13th birthday party. And which is a little strange, I admit. Looking back, I'm like, wow. But anyhow, so when I was talking to this psychic, she took my hand and she said, you and your brother have been brother and sisters before in a past life. And I see you during a war and you're running through a forest and you meet a soldier. And of course at that point I stopped her and I said, I just had this dream, he was in my room. And she said, I know, he's coming back into your life. So that there planted this idea in my head of maybe we've known people in our lives before. So then when I was in my 20s, I read somewhere that you could ask to know the name of the person that you used to be. And so I did that just for fun. Every night I would go to bed saying, tell me who I was, tell me who I was. Nothing happened. And then one night I had this dream and it was just all black. I couldn't see anything, but I heard the name over and over again of Tess McInerney. Now, I've never met a Tess McInerney, not that I know of, I have no idea, but I did, looking back, I found that Tess had played a role in my life in some strange way. I'd been fixated by this name. As a kid, I insisted that we name our car Tess, which didn't make much sense, but I had a stuffed animal named Tess. I also realized I had written a story when I was 8 years old that a dog and a cat were climbing the ladder to heaven, and the cat's name was Tessa and the dog's name was Will, and because they were cats and dogs, they fought the entire time. And when they got up to the top, God said, you got to go back and learn to love each other and do it again. And so looking back on it, I thought, oh wow, this name Tess is actually figured kind of prominently in my life in some way. But I've never looked it up. I've never done anything with that name because I don't even know where to begin. I don't know what continent, what time, what anything. And you know what? For all I know, she was a friend that my mom met sometime, and it just stuck in my head. I have no idea. But it did bring up this question of, well, what if I had a character, and what if she had a name that she dreamt of, and she had just enough to go on, and so she did look it up, and so that's all where the beginnings of the book and my character's dream.
That's fascinating. Now everybody here is going to go home tonight and think about Tess.
I know. and the name is not Tess. I changed it. My character was definitely not a Tess. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Well, J. Ryan Stradle, Kitchens of the Great Midwest. I'll tell you a little bit about this book, which is a lot of fun. When Lars Thorvald's wife, Cynthia, falls in love with wine and a dashing sommelier, right? He's left to raise their baby Eva on his own. He's determined to pass on his love of food to his daughter, starting with pureed pork shoulders. As Eva grows, she finds her solace and salvation in the flavors of her native Minnesota. From Scandinavian look of fish to hydroponic chocolate habaneros. Each ingredient represents one part of Eva's journey as she becomes the star chef behind a legendary and secretive pop-up supper club, culminating in an opulent and emotional feast that's a testament to her spirit and resilience. Now, each chapter in this wonderful book, this debut book tells the story of a single dish and character, at once capturing this zeitgeist of the Midwest, the rise of foodie culture, and delving into the ways food creates community and a sense of identity. Kitchens of the Great Midwest is an unexpected mother-daughter story about bittersweet nature of life, its missed opportunities, and its joyful surprises. It's a brilliant book, absolutely brilliant. Well, J. Ryan, first of all, I have to admit I've been hungry ever since I read your book, first and foremost. And I want to equate this to something and ask the question based on this. So in the 1980s, Laura Esquivel's Like Water for Chocolate was published. And that's the first time that I read a book that the novel, the fiction and the novel, especially with the food, became a vibrant character in the story.
Me too.
Yours is the second time it happened,
Okay.
to be honest with you. And you truly achieved that. Two things. Have you always seen food as something more than, say, just subsistence? And how do you find a way to relate food to individual characters and characteristics?
Wow. That's the first time I've ever been asked either of those questions. Thanks for everyone for being here, and it's wonderful to be here with all these excellent authors. It's such an honor. And yeah, thanks for taking time out of your lives to spend time with authors too. We appreciate it. Wow. Well, when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I really wanted to travel the world. Unfortunately, all I had was my job at Musicland, if you remember those, and my mom's Volkswagen Golf, and those couldn't get me very far. So my high school girlfriend and I decided to visit the world as such by going to the various restaurants of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and trying out different ethnic cuisines as a shorthand for sampling places in the world we wanted to go. This is the early 90s. The restaurant culture in Minnesota wasn't as robust as it was today, as it is today, but there was still one or two of everything. And so in my years of high school, I found myself spending every weekend trying Indian food, Ethiopian food, Thai food, Japanese food, just going through it. And eventually I realized I really like this. This is no longer just a thumbprint on a future itinerary, but it's an experience unto itself. And I came to really enjoy food. For my birthday one year, Stacy, the high school girlfriend, attempted to get a shakshuka recipe from an Algerian restaurant we visited as a birthday present for me. And I think that's when I realized, like, okay, I'm into food as much as I'm into travel. And my whole life, I've sort of been waiting for a book set in the culinary world of the Midwest to come out. And well, there's some nonfiction books that cover the topic. There wasn't a novel, and I eventually realized, well, I suppose I'd better write it myself. I don't see anyone else running to do it. And I've kind of been battling with this my whole life, like whether or not Midwestern food is underrated. And I don't think it is, actually. I think it's properly rated. But that said, I still feel like that's the food I grew up with, and that's the food I wanted to celebrate, and I really wanted to write a book that sat on that line between the high-calorie desserts and casseroles and hot dishes I grew up with, and the foodie culture that is as vital and vibrant there as it is anywhere in the country. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It did. And I'm still hungry too.
All right.
It's a great book. It really is fun read. It's extremely entertaining. So thank you so much. I'd like to move over to our next book. It's A Girl in Traffic by Miss Valderrama. And I'll tell you a little bit about this lovely book and poignant book. 12-year-old Juhi Gupta loves her simple life in a remote Indian village. She and her mother and father, they might be poor, but they're very happy. Then one day, everything changes. Her father heads to the doctor to remove a rotten tooth, but instead, his kidney is stolen and sold on the black market. Juhi and her parents are kidnapped and dropped in a New Delhi slum. Separated from her parents, Juhi must quickly learn to survive. Luckily, she has a rare skill that's greatly in demand, especially in the slums. She knows how to read and write. At first, her quick wit allows her to thrive, but soon they attract unwanted attention. And she's faced with impossible decisions and desperate choices. Meanwhile, in the United States, Kevin Whitman, he's dying. And no American doctor can help him, so he ventures to India for treatment. He has no idea that in so doing, he'll change Juhi's life forever. Pretty dramatic book. Well, let me ask you, Ms. Valderrama. At one time, you were a healthcare strategist. From that experience, how did it aid you the most when you were approaching your compelling novel and how to tell this story?
Thanks for that question, and I also want to say thank you for being here today. I actually am a resident of El Segundo, and I live right here on Main Street, and if you see me around town, it's usually pushing a stroller with my little girl. So you can catch me usually at Happy Baby up on Main Street, Butterfly, or Rec Park, and I hope to bump into all of you. My path is, sounds funny to hear that I'm an MBA and healthcare strategist turned novelist and stay-at-home mom. But when you fill in the color and the detail, it starts to make perfect sense. I got the idea for my book about 10 years ago when I was in business school, as you learned in my introduction. I wrote this business plan about medical tourism, which is when Americans that are uninsured or underinsured travel to foreign countries for medically necessary procedures. Most of the time in today's world, people that travel abroad for medical procedures are doing it for elective procedures, augmentation, facelifts, plastics. But there is a subset of people who cannot afford hip replacements, knee replacements, in some cases open heart surgery, and they're traveling abroad to world-class facilities with world-class doctors and can get those procedures for a fraction of the US price. But in my research, I found out that there was also this thing happening where people's kidneys were being stolen and from the locals, so the poor people in these countries, and they were being transplanted in the Westerners that were traveling abroad to these countries. And my plan was to graduate and start a business in medical tourism. I wanted to match Americans with the hospitals abroad. But ethically, when I found out about organ trafficking, I had to throw that plan out the window. So I decided I had all of this knowledge and it had to go somewhere. Coincidentally, I ended up working at the second largest dialysis company in the country. That was pure coincidence, where I was immersing kidneys every single day. I got more and more knowledge about what was happening in the world of dialysis. I had the knowledge of India, having traveled there my whole life, American-born, but parents that have immigrated from India. So I had that piece of it. I have been to slums. I could taste these people. I could see them. I could touch them. I could see the people that were being preyed upon. And now I had been exposed to the dialysis patients. These were good people that were desperate to live. And when you're desperate, it's amazing what people will do to survive. And I found myself in this rare position to be able to write this story, because at the dialysis company that I was at for 5 years, nobody was talking about this issue. And I kept asking, who is talking about this? Why are we not engaged in this topic? We have a lot of muscle in the kidney world. Let's use it for some good. And people looked at me cross-eyed. They thought organ trafficking was a myth. So it also happened that I was at the point of ultimate misery in a corporate job, and I decided to quit and stay at home and write my book full-time and have a family. So right now, my full-time job is to write my books and stay at home with my daughter. But like you said, Parnaz, I just had to write this story. There was no other option.
Well, we're very happy that you did, because it's a wonderful story, very poignant and educational.
Thank you.
As well. Very brilliant. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to move on to Meg Howry's The Wanderers. And how about this for a review? The Wanderers, a lyrical and subtle space opera. This is 3 astronauts and their families must endure the effects of a pioneering space program. Consider the wit and precision of this portrait of American astronaut Helen Kane, one of these astronauts, the 3 that are involved in the program. Awareness of imminent possible death is not without beneficial properties. Risk of annihilation can be a key ingredient. Like baking soda, a teaspoon or so is sufficient to make all the other components rise up in glory. But without it, no cake. Although the contours of a space drama may seem familiar to a 21st century readership, Ms. Howry, through the poetry of her writing and the richness of her characters, makes it all seem new. Brilliant writing.
Thank you.
My question for you, where were you when the idea of this story first crossed your mind? And what triggered you to write this story about these 3 astronauts, 2 astronauts and a cosmonaut actually, that are sequestered, if you may say, for 17 months?
Thank you. I read a newspaper article about 6 or 7 years ago, about something called Mars 500, which was a collaboration between the European and Russian space agencies. They put 6 volunteers in a series of modules for 520 days. 520 days being basically the budget econo version of getting to Mars and back. So the idea of putting volunteers in these modules was to test the psychological stresses and physiological stresses of long-term isolation, which is something that astronauts on the space station, we've now had astronauts up there for over a year, but nobody really knows what will happen to an astronaut that's in space for that long, that far away on Mars. At a certain point on the distance to Mars, there's a communication gap between Earth. So there are all these factors. So they put these 6 guys, and they were all guys, in these simulators. And I'm just reading this newspaper article, and I think, that would be a good setting for a novel. And then I thought, this is too bad I can't write that novel, because I don't know anything about space exploration. And that would be just a nightmare of research that I'd never be able to get out of. And I'm a literary fiction writer, and that's sort of a sci-fi territory, and, well, I won't do that. And then 5 years later, I had a book. So I spent about a year and a half telling myself I couldn't write the book, and I wasn't writing the book while researching the book. And then after a year and a half, I just gave up and admitted I was writing the book. And then I did things like I went to space camp in Wyoming. It was actually sort of astronomy camp. It turns out camp in your 40s is pretty much camp life at age 8. You're like, who am I going to be friends with? This pillow is weird. What am I eating? Except, you're in cosmology class for 8 hours. But I spent some hours in sensory deprivation tanks, because I thought I needed to know physically what it felt like to be in microgravity. Good, as it turns out. I'll report back. It feels good. So that was the genesis of it, a newspaper article.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And all that came from one little article
Yeah.
that you read. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. That's fantastic. And you get to go to space camp if you read well too. So that's great. Very exciting. That's very cool. Well, the next book I'd like to talk about is The Fortune Teller, which will have a new cover. The Fortune Teller. Beautiful cover. And The Fortune Teller, written by Miss Gwendolyn Womack. This is about an ancient manuscript which seems to predict the future, including the dangerous journey set into motion by the woman who discovers it. Her name's Semel Kavnaugh. She works for a prestigious New York auction house, and when she's called to Switzerland after the death of a famous manuscript collector, she makes an amazing discovery in his library, a manuscript dating back to the time of Cleopatra, written by the daughter of a librarian at the Great Library of Alexandria. Even more amazing, the script's writer is an oracle, so she's able to trace her progeny's stories forward in time from ancient Egypt through World War II. As the oracle traces her line and reveals the history of an ancient set of symbols that eventually come to comprise the modern tarot deck, Semel's professional interest is piqued. And when the manuscript suddenly addresses Semel by name, she becomes obsessed with discovering the connections between the manuscript's fortune tellers and her own life. And as Semel learns more about the tumultuous histories of the oracle's descendants, she also learns that the people she thought she could trust are not what they seem. Now, the fortune teller alternates back and forth between a whirlwind history that spans thousands of years and the suspense of Semel's search. So, let me ask you, Miss Womack, Semel Kavnaugh, she's my female Indiana Jones after reading this. Where did this character originate from in the recesses of your mind?
Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. I actually pronounce it simile, so I've never
Thank you.
heard it.
Okay.
So simile just I've always had this idea. I wanted to do a tarot story where the character would journey through the cards. In tarot, there are 22 major arcana cards, starting with the Fool and ending with the World. And I thought, well, what if a character goes through the journey of these 22 cards on their journey of discovery? And so that was the original idea that I wrote down in my storybook about 20 years ago. And then basically, Simile came out of the research of just really once I had the idea that half of this story was going to be told in a memoir with an ancient manuscript, she became to really form in my mind as the manuscript's appraiser who finds it and begins translating it. And when I first kind of settled on Simile being a manuscript's appraiser, I was a little unsure about writing that because I didn't really know the world. So it involved just a lot of research to get kind of a writer's confidence to write her world. And I really kind of got that through joining the Manuscript Society, which I stumbled on in my research. And they're a wonderful society of collectors in the United States that just offer a wealth of material. And so I started imagining, well, Simile's been a member for years. And that just, she grew out of the research and looking at, museum programs and all of that good stuff. So it was a lot of fun to write.
That's wonderful. It was a lot of fun to read as well. And we're going to jump into, in a few minutes, the memory page. We'll come back to you on that. I had a question for Miss Fortan. In The Girl from the Garden book, the character, the story being told and witnessed through the memories of Makbobe.
Yes.
How much of Makbobe is in you, and how do you differ from her?
Well, genetically, Mahbuba is my maternal grandmother, so
Right.
to take that question literally a
Yes.
lot. How can I answer this one? Growing up, Mahbuba was my hero. She's very different from the women of her generation. The girls of Mahbuba's generation were married between the ages of 13 and 18, but by 18 you were an old maid. Mahbuba held on until she was 22, and then she was beaten for 6 months until she finally, walked down the aisle. At the age of, her own mother died when she was 3. At the age of 9, she snuck out of the house with all the money in her piggy bank and went to the local school and signed herself up. And she was the head of her class in Iran. They rank you student number 1, 2, 3. All the way through her school career until she went to college for teachers, and there she earned a scholarship to go to Paris to study mathematics, at which point she went home to tell her father. And Rachel, the matriarch in my book, wasn't happy about Mahbuba's path in life and said, no, you're not going anywhere, you're going to marry the boy next door. And she ended up doing that, but he turned out to be a great guy. They built a life together. Mahbuba taught and then started a school and bought real estate and flipped them for extraordinary amounts of money. She's just she didn't fit into her time and place. And the story is told from her perspective, but it's told at a point where she's entered dementia. When I first started writing this book, Mahbuba was diagnosed with dementia. And the stories she had been telling me started slipping away from her. And so I decided to write her memories about Rachel, the matriarch of the home she grew up in, from the perspective of someone who's slipping into dementia. So, jumps back and forth. Mahbuba is everything I would like to be. She's my hero. So
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very beautiful. Ms. Adar, you were here. Take us into your imagination now. Here's an interesting question for you. where are places you feel or believe you have been before?
Wow, good question. You know, I don't know. I've always had a fondness or an interest in the South, and so I think that there's always been I've always been drawn to it, especially like the bayou areas. I've always been really interested in that for some reason. I know as a child we would go to Disneyland and we'd go on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, and I could care less about the rest of the ride. It was just that very beginning when you're on the little boat and it's so peaceful and there are cattails and the water and fireflies and an old man fishing, and I would have given anything to just live right there in that shack. I didn't want the diamonds that I knew around the corner. So I've always been fascinated by that. You know, there are lots of countries that I've been drawn to that I've not gone to yet. Scotland is one of them. I've always wanted to go. I also, you know, I think, you know, just ancestrally too, you know, I've got, you know, half my family is from Belgium, the other half is from Kurdistan of Iraq, and I'm definitely drawn to that. You know, of course, there's interest because it's my family, but also I feel like there's a certain like DNA pull that I need to explore.
That's lovely. That's lovely. And I bet you Johnny Depp was on the ride too with you there. Started out there. Ms. Valderrama, let me ask you this about your book. Here in America, in the film industry, we've had glimpses of India through movies, with Slumdog Millionaire being, of course, an Academy Award winner, and even $1 Million Arm to a certain degree, which, by the way, is not about organ trafficking. Just want to point that out real quick. What parts of India did you want to depict both in the positive light and, to be honest, in not so much a negative light, but a light that we're not familiar with, and why did you want to depict those images?
So thank you for that question. It was a very conscious decision of how I portrayed both India and the United States. If you've read my book, I hope it came across that this was not didactic, good, bad, evil, you know, evil and good. That was not my goal. There wouldn't be a supply of kidneys if there wasn't a demand. Where is that demand coming from? The Western world. I'm not saying it's necessarily all the United States, but it's coming from the Western world. So I really wanted to be balanced in my depiction of what was happening on a global scale. For India in particular, if your question is what parts of India, it wasn't necessarily geographically there were specific parts, but it was the underbelly that I wanted to show, and there is a lot of intrigue with that, especially after the movie Slumdog Millionaire. For some reason, I have always been attracted to the slums of India, to the behest of my family. I was this American kid traveling to India for the first time when I was 5 years old. My sister is going bananas, buying saris and lehengas and the matching jewelry and all of the things that girls are supposed to want. And I wanted to visit a slum. And I was there for 5 weeks for the first time. When I visited for the first time, I was 5 years old. My mother kept badgering me that you were going to get home and you were going to say, my sister got all of these beautiful clothes, I didn't get anything, and she said, we are not coming back here for a long time. So this is your chance. And I finally, after 3 weeks, had to look at her straight in the eye and say, Mom, by the end of this trip, the amount of money that you spend on her, we are donating that equivalent amount in my name. And that's when she knew I was for real. And she was shocked because nobody goes to India and says that that's the part of the country that they want to see. So I really wanted to show that, and one of my favorite parts that I wrote was that in these slums, which I described as the size of Costco, with little partitions inside, and each partition is maybe a 5 by 5 square foot space where up to 20 people could reside. And these were Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, all living under this roof. And that's what really happens. And they live in cooperation. Sure, fights erupt and people get mad, but they all come back together again at some point. And I really wanted that to come out. And also, like your novel, the feedback that I've received from mine is that it left people very hungry and craving Indian food. And so that was also something that if you haven't had exposure to Indian food, I really encourage you to go to Samosa House in Culver City. The Samosa House in Culver City.
There you go. Very good plug. And again, back to being hungry for some reason.
But yeah, those were I think two parts of the country that I really wanted.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. It's a great way to introduce us to that as well. Well, Jay Ryan, we're on the food subject. Let me ask you a real quick question here. What foods would you be afraid of exploring and why?
Oh, wow. Well, when I was in the Canadian Arctic working on Ice Road Truckers, on a season where they shot about 120 miles north of the Arctic Circle in the towns of Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, there was a local delicacy made from fermented whale blubber. And I avoided that, mostly because I could smell it when I was over 100 feet away from it. And I thought anything that's that pungent, I probably shouldn't eat, you know? I thought, I don't want to spend my last week here, like in a bed, night sweats, you know, food poisoning. So I'm gonna maybe not try the fermented whale blubber, but normally I'm a pretty adventurous eater. That scared me straight.
That's pretty funny. That's cute. I'm going to jump real quick over to Gwendolyn Womack's other novel before we get back to Meg. And this is The Memory Painter. It's a debut novel. And The Memory Painter is a taut thriller and timeless love story spanning 6 continents and 10,000 years of history. Brian Pierce is an internationally famous artist whose paintings have dazzled the world, but there's a secret to his success. Every canvas is inspired by an unusually vivid dream. When Brian awakes, he possesses extraordinary new skills, like the ability to speak obscure languages and an inexplicable genius for chess. All his life, he has wondered if his dreams are recollections, if he is re-experiencing other people's lives. Now, Linz Jacobs is a brilliant neurogeneticist. She's absorbed in decoding the genes that help the brain make memories until she is confronted with an exact rendering of a recurring nightmare at one of Brian's shows. She tracks down the elusive artist, and their meeting triggers Brian's most powerful dream yet. Visions of a team of scientists who, on the verge of discovering a cure for Alzheimer's, died in a lab explosion decades ago. Now together, Brian and Liz start to discern a pattern. But a deadly enemy watches their every move, and he will stop at nothing to ensure that past stays buried. Now, The Memory Painter, it's a brilliant combination of science fiction and suspense, with a love story woven in kind of like a double helix to a certain degree. Who was your writing inspiration to be able to inspire you to pen such a unique style?
My writing inspiration?
Yes.
I would say Elizabeth Kostovas, the historian, really inspired me for that book.
Okay, now, was there a particular dream or event that triggered your imagination to write this novel? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, The Memory Painter, the idea really hit me like a ton of bricks as I was walking down the hallway of my apartment about, I'd say, 18, 20 years ago. And it just was this idea that neuroscientists had created a wonder drug that if we take it, we can remember all of our past lives and have all of these abilities and speak all the languages. And I ran to the phone and I called my sister and I said, I know what I'm going to write next. And I said that, and I said it's a futuristic thriller about neuroscientists, and she said, well, why does it have to happen in the future? Why can't it just be happening right now? And I said, you're right, I gotta go, and I hung up. and I thought to myself, not only did it not happen in the future, it happened 30 years ago in the past, and no one knows it ever happened. And then the idea of Brian painting in the dark, in the middle of the night, speaking ancient Greek came to me right then, and I started writing it. So that was how it happened. It was really fast.
That's incredible how it all just connects and clicks, huh? That's fascinating. Thank you so much. Well, Meg, I want to ask you about something in The Wanderers. And it's it's an interesting thing because I found this quite inspirational. And you have found tremendous success in both your writing career as well as your dancing career. For young ladies and men out there who have theater, dance, or even sports in their background, how was your experience as an extraordinary ballet dancer and actor? And how does that help you become an award-winning writer? What have you been able to take from that has helped you the most?
There's a thing, it would seem that the obvious thing is, as a dancer you have to be very disciplined and self-directed, and so that would seem to be as a writer, but I'm actually much more disciplined as a writer than I was as a dancer, I think. The truth is that the most helpful thing is that when you're a dancer, which is, especially for ballet, which is what I did, and you start very young, and in this country, there's no real reward to being a ballet dancer culturally. For the most part, it's poorly paid, not very well attended, and it's a short career. So you only do it because you can't not do it. At some point, it grabs a hold of you, and it's this fierce search to try to capture maybe one moment that you had where you knew you danced well. So you live a little bit off the grid. You don't expect to be rich or famous, or you just work. It's a very internal thing. So as a writer, you also don't get rich or famous. and there's no sense in doing it at all unless it's just what you have to do. Because you wrote one sentence one time and thought that's a good sentence, so you just want to try to do that again. So I think the connection is really some sort of private battle that I've been engaged with for a long time on trying to do something hard well, and then failing, and then trying to fail a little bit better each time.
Well, you've succeeded with this one, so congratulations on that. Well done, well done. Normally, we would open the floor up for questions from everybody, but this year we're going to do something a little different, and we're going to have you have a chance to then go upstairs and meet the authors as they are sitting at the different tables, one-on-one. Good suggestion, Julie, thank you very much. I'm going to point out too, since we're just about a minute or two at a time so that the authors can get upstairs for 4 o'clock. I'm the luckiest guy in the world because I am given the books to read several months before the authors come in. And it's funny because as writers, as you know, it's so much fun reading really great authors, because I know I go into my little, oh God, what am I going to do? What am I going to write? And they just rejuvenate everything that I want to work on. So I can't thank you enough for such great works of art that you put out, because these are great, these are fabulous. So my recommendation to everybody is, hey, this is only June. We have July, August before the end of the summer. Great books. Just wander down, take these books out, go down to the Strand, sit at the little cafe at the bottom of the hill, and you'll love reading these down there. They're perfect. They're perfect summer reading books. And so enjoy that. Enjoy these incredible authors. And please, give them a great hand, because it's exceptional writing. Exceptional people. Thank you. Thank you so much. And get upstairs and say hi. Make sure you get a copy of each and every one of their books. They're outstanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you.